Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Jahid Chowdhury. I'll be your host today. I'll be hosting Anthony Miranda, Queensborough presidential candidate. I'd like to bring him on today to speak about himself and his candidacy for the Queensborough presidential race, as well as his support of our community, as well as the issues that he stands on. I'll be asking him many, many questions related to the recent protest about the 50-day repeal program and so on and so forth. We'll get to know him during this program and why our community, the Muslim community, specifically the Bengali community specifically, should vote for him. I'd like to invite Anthony Miranda to come and say a few words about himself before he goes.
Assalamu alaikum, and it is a pleasure and honor to be on the program with you today, to be able to speak to people who make a difference, to people who are voting right now. I live here in Queens in Fresh Meadows. I'm married, raising 3 boys here, and have been a community organizer for over 30 years, fighting for reform and equality. I'm retired from the New York City Police Department for over 20 years. I was the chief of police over at the Administration for Children's Services. And I continue to be an advocate and organizer in our community all over the United States. My desire to run for Queensborough president was about representing our communities, all of our communities. We have suffered many setbacks based on discrimination, based on lack of services, based on politicians not listening to the needs of our community. So as a resident, I was sick and tired of listening to politicians make promises that they never intended to keep. We are in a historical times of change. And what we cannot afford is to go back to politics as usual. So I implore you all in this opportunity of strength, where we're organizing, that you all exercise the power you have in your community to vote. And I say this, that any one community can make a difference in who wins in this election. So realize your power and the opportunity to make change to somebody who works with the communities and been working with the communities for many years. And that's why I'm asking for your support.
Anthony, you have been in our community many different masajids on Fridays, including Jamaica Muslim Center, including ICNA, and a lot of the masjids in Astoria. How has your reception been with our community, and how has your interaction been with the Muslim community specifically?
I mean, my interaction has been great. My reception has been great. The people have been very receptive and a lot of questions. So this is where I differ and from other politicians. And many people say, how do we know you're going to come back? Because politicians come on election time. And I say, listen, I'm not a politician. I'm a father, a person from the community, and I believe that I make a difference in how I respond to people and how I need to be held accountable. I tell everybody, hold me accountable to the things that I'm saying, as we should have done to all the other elected officials. I don't want to come just in election time, but the relationships that we build are something that are going to last beyond this election. Winning Queensborough's president just means you have an additional voice, and to make sure that I clearly understand what discrimination is, and I clearly understand what it means when a community is left out and being disregarded. And so we found a lot of needs in the Muslim community alone that were not being addressed. And I felt a kinship, a partnership that I said, I can make a difference here in the relationship with the police department, in the relations to services that are received, and even bringing halal food to our public schools, making sure that the community has access to the social services that are provided. And I'm also working with representatives now with the Administration for Children's Services to see about adopting children that may have come into the custody of ACS as a result of the COVID-19 crisis.
I know you have spoken out when the mayor gave a small package of snacks, saying that the peanut butter or whatever that they were giving, chips, was posed as halal. And what action did you take at that point in time?
Well, I mean, as soon as it was brought to my attention, I think this is extremely important. Our government and our representatives have a chance to over exaggerate things. And they put the statement out that they were providing halal foods throughout all the schools in the city of New York. And they listed various locations. And they told families to come out with their children and that they would be there for them. But when we inspected what they were given, some of the sites didn't have halal food, and it was not any type of halal food that's respected by the community. So it was more, crackers and things like that. That's not a meal, and you can't present that as a meal to the community. So they did an injustice in their representation. Immediately after we made that announcement and held them accountable for it, they began to change the process. They actually engaged more representatives from the Muslim community. They said mea culpa, and they tried to fix the problem. But they should have never allowed that problem to happen. Had they been on top of the issues, had they been monitoring what they say and with the presentation they're making to the public, then we would have never had to have that press conference or send out that press release asking for accountability.
Thank you. I'm here joined by Dr. Junoon Chowdhury. He is a physician at Queens Hospital. He's a psychiatrist. He also has his own practice. He was a two-term general secretary of Jamaica Muslim Center. I invite him to pose questions to Anthony Miranda here, our Queensborough presidential candidate.
Hi, Anthony. Good morning.
Good
Good to
morning.
see you on the weekend. As a physician and communities, from taking their children from their service, let me give you one example. In one case, there was a crazy lady who threw her child through the window, and she was in prison. But because of that, her roommates were taken into custody, and also the kids of their roommates have been taken away. And for that lady who was not a part of it, whether he was living in the household, I have to evaluate and write repeated letters that she is mentally stable. She has no any psychiatric illness, and she should be left alone, and her kids could be left alone at home. What can you do to help those families?
Okay, so let's speak beyond just one particular case and understand that the system, if it's not very active with the various communities right now, then they tend to neglect us. And it's not only in the Muslim community, it's in other communities as well. So that's why it says the knowledge that I have about how ACES works and the impact it has on our families and our children, I think that's extremely important. I've been working with, and I have already started working with representatives in the community about how to interact better and have more effective response from the Administration for Children's Services. It tends to be that a lot of things that they request from us seem to be overbearing, and they do make quick the judgment. But we also have to make sure that, again, we found that ACS has not been the most responsive to our communities and to our children in protecting them. We've also found that they've not been able to provide the adequate support, like you spoke of, for children from the Muslim community to continue their faith while they're in ACS custody. And so these are things that need to be addressed immediately. We cannot afford to wait on these things. So as a Queensborough president as well, I can be advocating for and organizing to make sure that you have the proper representation and that the dialogue is open to make sure we get the changes that we need to have an effective interaction. Because I found that quite often when the communities don't have that connection, or they don't know the process by which to interact with ACS, we tend to get left out. So ACS has been criticized historically for not responding properly to calls for cases of child abuse, right? So they have been called out there, and there have been many newspaper articles about these things. So we need to make sure that they're doing their job properly. At the same time, we got to make sure that they're not wholesalely condemning any one community and denying them access or the protection of their children. So in that case, I would absolutely be an advocate. I would be a partner, right? I would be out there with you when we have these meetings. I would call ACS to public hearings when it comes to discussing their policies and procedures and how it impacts on the Muslim community and other minority communities as well.
Anthony, you
Just
have
can I
sent a letter to. Just one question, Anthony. You have sent a letter to ACS on behalf of at least 12 large Muslim organizations. During COVID, we know a lot of Muslim families, a lot of Muslim children were taken away by ACS due to their parents, the father and the mother, being lost. Did you get any responses from that?
Well, at first, again, it took them a while. They did finally respond. I had a phone conversation with their public relations individual, and I called for a phone conference with leaders of the Muslim community, which they're currently working on right now. But to be honest with you, I believe that their response has been somewhat lacking, and it was not responsive enough. They could have written back. They could have contacted us sooner. They understand that this is a crisis. We're anticipating a second wave of COVID-19, and we wanted to make sure that the needs of the children are being addressed properly. So that has been the strong message that we send to them, and we are still advocating for that. And we will definitely have that phone conference with leaders from the Muslim community to be able to talk to them directly. My entire goal here was to make sure that we create a strong dialogue where they can have representatives of the community that are readily available to them. At all costs, ACS is built on the premises that children, if possible, should not be going into the custody of ACS, but going to both family members and responsible individuals. If that process is cumbersome and is inherently biased in eliminating communities of color and Muslim communities, then we need to fix it immediately, because we cannot afford, again, to have our children in a system that is insensitive to the needs of kids and their special circumstances or their religious beliefs. So that has to change.
Anthony, I attempt to follow up my question with another example. Can I?
Yes.
In another case, an infant was born, and the infant's femur was found broken. So the SES took away that baby and the second baby from the family. You hear me?
Yes.
You hear me? So the father came to me frantically. At that time, I was the general secretary of Jamaica Muslim Center. So I had to write letter in my letterhead that I personally know him. This family has no history of abuse, blah, blah, blah. Later on, a few weeks later, another fracture happened to the same baby. So now what they found, that there is a congenital condition called osteogenesis imperfecta, that kids' bones are not formed properly and they break down frequently. So they found out there's a false case, and the babies and the family suffered for no reason, and both the babies were sent back. So that's why I'm saying they react over, and they react excessively for reason, and the families get victimized.
Yeah, and I agree with you. So we're in these cases, and this is an extreme case where a child has a disease that probably was not detected right away. But there had to have been a better level of communication and interaction that we're not quick to judgment. I think ACS says that they would err on the side of the children and take the precautions to make sure nothing was going on. But then the question bears there: how intrusive were they? How abusive was the process? And then we have to make sure, because in many cases, once they open a case in the family, those cases don't go away, right? So that allegation is also there against the parents. And we need to make sure that, like when police records are expunged, ACS records are also expunged, especially when they find out that there was no wrongdoing, that there was a medical condition, that this information should not be discoverable by anybody. And I think there's a better process. Again, this is about creating process and open communication and ensuring they understand the relationship. We need to hold ACS accountable like any other city agency for all of their actions. Good ones we praise, and the bad ones we criticize, and we fix the process to make sure it doesn't happen a second time.
Thank you.
So, Anthony, I want to go on to, if Dr. Janoon is finished with the ACS questions, I can move forward. Are you done with the ACS
Yes,
questions?
of
Do you
course.
have any more follow-up? Okay. Then, Anthony, I want to go to a few of the other things that we have pressing. The governor says about the Say Their Name agenda. Can you please explain that, and what's your take on that?
the say their name agenda. Is that I couldn't hear
Yes.
you.
Yeah. Yes. That
So this
is
is a
by the government.
yeah.
Are you
This
aware of
is the
it?
process. Yeah, this is the process by where we don't want to forget the history of the police brutality cases and the people who've been victimized by abusive police practices. Right. I think it has great recognition to be able to not forget. But I want to say the following: Eric Gardner happened 6 years ago. We are 6 years later, and then we have George Floyd. As a result of the community unrest, and only because of the result of the community unrest, are the changes being made now. So when you have all these elected officials in front of you saying that they are now advocating for change, that they're now passing laws, I struggle with the process and I tell the community, hold them accountable for the last 6 years. Go back to the cases of Anthony Baez and Amadou Diallo. That's longer than 6 years. Where was the reform? Where was the accountability that was necessary? So forget about the sound bites and the camera views that they're advocating for right now. Hold them accountable for their lack of actions. Thank them for what they're doing right now in the last couple of weeks, but it's a whole lot too late. So let's not forget, again, like I said, Eric Garner 6 years ago. No movement at all for police reform or accountability. No movement to recognize the names of anybody else who died in police custody, regardless of what their nationality was. None. But now we need the protests. We need the peaceful protests. We need the diversity of the community. It's the diversity of the march that is creating the changes and the platform to make the changes that we want right now. So yes, push every elected official who currently holds a position and say, change it now. Not 6 months, not a year, not 2 years, not 6 years later. Change it now. But then after they make those changes, don't reward them for what they have failed to do over a long period of time. We're in the process of Democratic primaries right now, especially here in New York. Vote them out. Send a clear message that 6 years was too long, 10 years was too long, 20 years was too long for us to get to the point of where we are today, and vote them out. Many politicians reinvent themselves running in different positions. I'm running for Queensborough president. 3 of the candidates I'm running against were city council people during these crises. Not one bill was introduced in the city council that had to do with illegal police quotas for summonses and arrest in our community. Not one. Not one bill deals directly with police accountability for police brutality cases. They failed us. And now they want you to praise them. And I say voter power comes in those demonstrations. Millions of people are marching. Let's make sure that starting today, we march to the polling sites. And like in other states, force them to stay open past midnight if necessary, but make sure every single vote is counted. Don't vote on how we look or how we speak, but vote about our actions and our failures, because they have failed us. For 30 years, I've been advocating for the changes that they're just now arriving to. For 30 years, I ran an organization called the National Latino Officers Association, worked with the Grand Council of Guardians and 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement, the Muslim Officers Association. Those organizations were created predominantly out of lawsuits filed by us to be able to represent ourselves. And that door opened now allows all officers to be able to represent. But again, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, 20 years later, let's not forget, your vote is going to make a difference. Hold them accountable. Make the changes that they want to give you now, but hold them accountable for the last 6 years. Don't forget.
Happening because the politicians are not making it, or is it because the silence of the blue wall, as they say, the police unions are so strong? Like Patrick Lynch, from what I can remember, has been there forever, and he is a very strong advocate on some of the practices that the police union are do, and he holds on to them. So, what do you think about that?
Again, we can, unions, any union, responsibility is to defend the rights of its members, right? If you give away the house, if a union said, I want all my members to have Cadillacs, and the city gave it to them, then the city is responsible. unions will get as much as they can to defend their members. Now, independent of that, Pat Lynch and other union representatives had said some very racist things at times against our communities. But we don't vote on them. We vote on our elected officials. We have the power to decide who represents us and who would stand up for us. So the power lies in our vote to hold the elected officials accountable. It's their fault. If they succeeded to power because of the donations made by union members or the fear of the protests that unions will make against them, then that's the fault of our elected officials, because their primary responsibility was to represent our community. They're supposed to be able to stand up and defend us and speak for us, even in challenging times. So no, blame our elected officials for not passing these laws. Not once did I hear an elected official stand up and say that another city councilman is preventing me from passing reform. They don't call each other out. And that's the change that we have to have. Accountability is not just on the police department side, but accountability is also for our elected officials. As the Queensborough president, if there's one elected official in Queens or anywhere else that decides that they're voting against a reform bill or a measure that protects our community, then I'm going to stand up and expose them to the people. And I'm going to call them out by their name, their title, and their position. I'm going to say, this is what they've done against us. So when we're holding these protests, we should also start making sure the crowds, the protesters, start marching to the offices of all these elected officials. And don't just accept what they changed in the last 10 or 20 days. Protest against the fact that they've been silent to the rights of our community. They've been silent to our voices for the last 6 years and 8 years. Hold them accountable for that. I had one elected official say, what do you want me to change, 40 years or 400 years of discrimination? No, I want you to change the 8 years that you've been in office where you could have made a difference for our community. That's the 8 years that I want you to fight against the discrimination and show that you did something different. Again, facts. No legislation introduced about illegal police quotas which impact our communities. And when you talk to any family, they'll tell you the same thing. There are illegal arrest quotas and there are illegal summons quotas. And the majority of those summons and that arrest activity is done in our communities.
Thank you. Dr. Janoon, you have a question for him?
Yes, Anthony. I know you're going to be the Queensborough president. That's what you're wishing, and we hope you become the Queensborough president. The Queensborough is the most diverse borough in the city of New York. There are a lot of ethnic people. I heard there are more than 100 ethnic people in the city of New York. And some of them are undocumented without any medical insurances, and they cannot get medical treatment because they're undocumented. What or how can you help those undocumented people to get help in their medical treatment?
I think, again, medical treatment should not be an issue of our status here, right? We're a humane society. That means that when people are sick and they need aid, our biggest history says that we're there as a community, as a human race to provide that support. COVID-19 exposed the shortcomings of our system. Remember, Queens was one of the last areas serviced. And then specifically, when they came to Queens, they only came to one specific area and they abandoned the rest of Queens. It took some time before they decided to put outlets in different areas of Queens. And then they said, your status didn't make a difference to be able to get aid. It was a pandemic. But the response was horrific. We cannot afford to have that happen if COVID-19 repeats itself as is anticipated. So every person is entitled to, and I also believe being an advocate for healthcare for all is extremely important. While it doesn't fall under the purview of my duties and responsibilities in the office, but my voice as an advocate, as the Queensborough president, supporting these initiatives, pushing legislators to pass the law to be able to be more encompassing, I think is extremely important. And I think we can also partner with different private medical institutions that are here in Queens and be able to fill that network. So where the city has failed us, I think a private partnership in healthcare will also assist to help those families who are undocumented who still need medical aid.
Very good. Thank you. Going back to some of the police reforms, what is your take on 50A? There is a lot of talk about that. If you could give us a highlight of what 50A is, and I know most of the politicians are saying to repeal it. Your take on it, and of course the defunding of resources, putting them somewhere else. Police department has about $2 billion budget, so please speak about that.
Let's talk first about what the movement was about. Black Lives Matter. The movement was about police brutality and police corruption, right? The failure to report and investigate police properly, and these allegations of police misconduct and abuse. 50A does not directly impact the changes that our community is looking for. Politicians drove us in a side conversation. 50A was a privilege that was negotiated by the unions. For a long time, the police have had it. Not having it really doesn't make a difference. Do away with it. I think most officers say, okay. The only officers who are concerned are the officers who have a bad history. And that is not the majority of the police department. That is a small percentage of officers who have a history that they need to be afraid of. So there are still legal issues about what type of cases can be disclosed, what kind of issues can be exposed to the community, right? There's still confidential information about the officer's home address and where they live at, that kind of thing. So those things can still be protected. However, 50A, do away with it. We're okay with it. Officers are okay with it. The community wants it. The politicians has pushed that as being the agenda. That is not the agenda. The agenda is accountability. An independent police prosecutor, special prosecutor, is something that we need. Something above the police department and above the district attorney's office that can hear all the cases of police brutality and death in police custody and have a proper investigation, an impartial, proper investigation, where the community gets to hear all the facts. And the officers feel comfortable enough that they can present the information necessary. Independent special prosecutor. CCRB has the ability to do investigations and make recommendations of penalties. We need to move from making recommendations to imposing penalties. Not that they submit it to the police commissioner and then the police commissioner decides he's going to disregard it or he doesn't believe it's righteous, so it's not going to do it. They have to impose penalties. That's something that they can change. We're talking about taking the administrative trial that the police department holds. They have control of all their administrative charges against officers. Take that away from the police department and move it, like all other city agencies, to the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, where they have independent hearing officers and judges that review all those cases and impose penalties. And there you will get a fairness in penalties that the community will understand and that the officers will understand. I know our elected officials now are introducing a matrix bill, and they're trying to sell it as something new. Well, our original lawsuit, the National Latino Officers filed a class action lawsuit against the police department. And part of the reforms that we asked for dates back almost 15 to 20 years ago. So this is not something new. This is a failure on the part of our elected officials to having addressed the changes that were necessary. Now let's speak to the next topic. You said the new phrase, the catchphrase is defund the police department. That's a political phrase, and it caught on. Defund the police department. Properly funding social services and the programs that support our community, from the youth programs to the senior programs to any social service programs that support our residents, is something that should be done regularly. Stop the misspending that goes on, and that would free up a lot of money. But they sold it as we chose to fund the police department over these programs. No, those elected officials over the last 8 years chose to fund the police department, and they continue to do it. So now when they say we shouldn't do it, understand that they were the same people that voted to have pass all this funding for the last 8 years. So please don't let politicians, and I say that because they're politicians, they're not elected officials, and they don't represent our interests, they represent their own interests. And they're worried about getting reelected. But they were the ones who voted on the budgets that they're now complaining about. Hold them accountable. If they defunded social programs, if social programs have been failing all these years and have been underfunded all these years, then it's their fault. They didn't have the fight that they're trying to have now. And they're only trying to have these public fights right now because our community is awake. And I urge everybody who's protesting. I know that we're now opening up back to regular business. But as we go back to work and go back to do the things that we do regularly, please do not stop the movement, because the changes only come if the movement is alive. And I say the following: we have a number of new people running for public office. Vote on them. Vote on somebody new. Don't vote on people who have had a lifetime to create change, not only for the police department, but in healthcare, but in social services and funding summer programs and overcrowding of schools, affordable housing. We've had a lifetime for them to make changes that were effective for our communities. They didn't do it. Don't allow them to now change their message. They're trying to reinvent themselves. Hold them accountable for all their inaction. And when you look at their history, and you look at my history and where we are today, there's only one candidate that has the 30 years worth of experience of fighting for our community when nobody else will, and that's me. And that's why I continue to ask for your support. Your community, any one community, will make a difference in this election. The last district attorney's race was lost or won by 50 votes. Depending on whose side you were, the difference was 50 votes. We have 2 million registered voters here in the borough of Queens. Total voter turnout averages about 3%. That's our failure as a community. But we cannot fail any longer. So the power is in your vote. Vote these political hacks out of office. And take a new view. Look for new people with new vision. What is Queens going to look like in the future? And make sure that you're voting for somebody who you can have confidence is going to be speaking for you, not speaking for luxury developers who are funding their campaigns, because that's all the other candidates have gotten that money. And some of them say, well, I didn't get it this year. Well, you had it for the last 8 years. So we know where your loyalty lies. It's not with our community. It's with the people who are giving you money. But the power still lies with the vote in our community. So please, the changes that we're asking for, police accountability, police reform, proper funding of our social programs, comes from your elected officials, not from sound bites.
Very nice. Thank you. I'd like to ask Dr. to pose a question.
Oh, me?
If not, then I would like your take, Anthony. Our community is affected by the new bill, the poultry farm bill. I've been talking about it for some time now. It would essentially close down the 90 plus slaughterhouses. They are unfairly equating the wet markets of China to the market here in New York, and they want to close it down for the fear of spreading COVID-19. Would you please give your take on it, and how the Latino community, our Muslim community, loves to have access to halal poultry and goats and so on and so forth, and that would deny and this would also infringe upon our religious rights. Would you please speak on the poultry farm bill?
So, again, I have been very much reading the information and advocating with you on these issues. So, again, a blanket response by most of our elected officials is to wholesale condemn an entire process without the proper investigation or documentation. So as the Queensborough president, I can absolutely be advocating for, hey, let's say the proof. Let's not, it's called fear mongering right now. Let's not do that. Let's not condemn an entire process or access from a community. The Latino community also goes to the same locations, right? And we cannot afford to have an entire industry condemned without having any verification and proof of what we're talking about. So again, I believe that the Queensborough president can play a crucial role in advocating with our elected officials who are passing these laws, the state assembly, the Senate, and the city council, in terms of pushing them to a point of being, please be non-biased. And let's not do fear mongering. Let us do proper investigation and get real information about cause and effect, and then take the appropriate action that protects the religious beliefs and the access for religious communities to have access that is necessary. Find alternative ways, but we need to make sure that we're protecting their rights. And I think that's the approach we need to take.
Very good. Today, you are giving out food in front of Jamaica Muslim Center. As you know, this is a very a mosque that is close to my heart. also Dr. Janoon Chowdhury. Would you before we go to closing remarks by Dr. Janoon Chowdhury yourself, would you please speak about what you're giving out today?
Well, actually, today we're giving out over 200 hot meals, halal meals there. This is not the first time we've been giving out PPE equipment, and we've been going to various food banking efforts to feed our communities. We've been out there, and I understand that there's a great need still. We're still in the midst of a crisis of both hunger and employment, of paying rent and people losing their homes but not being able to pay the mortgage, as well as small businesses that are being closed right now. So this is one effort that we're making to be able to give 200 meals out. And we're going to continue this process even after winning office into Queensborough President's office. We continue to work. As human beings, we cannot afford to be distracted by anything else. We have to make sure that we're filling the gaps and providing the support that's necessary for our families. So at no time are we going to look in different directions. We're going to look within ourselves. We're going to look to find unique partnerships. And anybody out there that figures out they have a different way, a more productive way, a more efficient way for us to be able to get more meals out and more access to people, then we welcome that conversation and that partnership. But our work is not over. And we are just honored to be able to provide these meals today. But there's work that needs to be done that we will continue to do in all of our communities.
Thank you so much. Closing statement, closing question from Dr. Janoon.
Thank you, Anthony. Listening to you, I think you spoke from your heart. I'm impressed by your eloquent speech, and we are for you. I'm also glad to know that being in the medical community and Jamaica Muslim Center, that you are distributing hot meals there and the PPE. We have medical friends, they might also need your help in the PPE things, N95 mask, if you have those things. Again, I thank you and we support you. Hope our community support you, and I want to see you at the hot seat of the Queensborough presidency. Thank you.
Inshallah. Inshallah. Thank you.
Closing statement from Anthony Miranda.
Yeah. Listen, again, I want to, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak to everyone, and thank you as a community for listening in. And I hope please share the message. We have, over this crisis, given out over 100,000 masks. We've gone to every single hospital in Queens. We went to the local precincts that were in need, and we gave out at various locations throughout Queens and Kingsbridge houses and Corona and East Elmhurst and different areas in Queens and the Far Rockaways as well. We were able to give out PPE equipment to the families that need it. We will continue to be, with our partnerships with private companies, be able to give as much supplies that are necessary in our community, and we continue to respond to those requests as well. There's an opportunity not to the election. There's an opportunity for change that will make a difference in all of our lives. We cannot afford to leave that to chance or to politics as usual or political hacks. Your vote will have an absolute impact on who wins this election. Exercise the power in your vote. Today, Saturday, was the first day of early voting. For the next 10 days, everybody should be marching to the polling sites. And we should turn out in record numbers. Our goal is 2 million. They have 2 million registered voters. We want 2 million registered voters participating in this election. Again, this COVID-19 crisis, police reform crisis, housing crisis, employment crisis, small business crisis. I mean, our whole economy right now is labeled with crisis. And the people who are trying to represent you have a history of failing in their goals. They don't even hold each other accountable, but they want you to pass legislation to hold other agencies accountable. Let's send our politicians a message. No more politics as usual. We want the change and we want the accountability. We want the vision that our future will look good and prosperous, and that all of us will be included in that transition. Vote for Anthony Miranda. I'm asking you to vote for me for Queensborough president, because I will make a difference, but I will make a difference with your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Ladies and gentlemen, viewers, I thank you for staying this whole program with us. As you have seen, we have asked many, many tough questions to Anthony Miranda, and we do believe he is the right candidate. He is not your politician. as usual. You're not going to get that same flavor. He has been supportive of our community very much, and he will do what is needed to make those much needed reforms for our community. He is not into the hands of corporate money, and he's not accountable to them. He is accountable to us. This is what he has stated again and again. I urge all of you to come out and vote. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
The Call of Peace, Save Humanity.